Okay, tonight,
Unit.
looking at another scenario, another set of issues, and learning how to live a life of love. And the case study begins with when you see a problem in someone's life that needs fixing. When you see a problem in someone's life that needs fixing. Perhaps when you in your considered reflection believe it represents, well, let me get this off my screen so I can see faces. Perhaps when you in your considered reflection believe it represents real danger for themselves or others, or perhaps yourself. Okay, and so in light of Christian faith and scripture, you look at the appendix. There's some of the keynote verses that Paul's notion it's all wrapped up in love your neighbors yourself. Jesus' command at the Last Supper. Paul's description of love in 1 Corinthians 13. His admonition to look not to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. And then the golden rule. And others. And, you know, as we have classes like this, which we will have from time to time, we have one more next week and then we go somewhere else for a while. But as we have these kind of classes, and you come up with, the verse that really helps me, I'd love to hear that. I gave you 4 or 5 of them here, but I think scripture's filled with them actually. So the issue is, when you see a problem in someone's life that needs fixing, how might we respond in ways that are loving? And and so under what circumstances has this been your experience in the past, or more broadly, under what circumstances can you picture this happening? And so I'll begin just very briefly in saying that you see a problem in someone's life that you judge needs fixing, and you end up saying and doing things. Said, oops, that wasn't it, which is the reason it strikes me that this is an important topic, is that you often, it's difficult, but now there's quite a range of circumstances this can include. When I say this, what were you thinking is essentially it, because there's quite a range of things here. And I don't think any of them are wrong, but what falls in this category? The word I probably want us to focus on tonight as much as anything is fixing.
Yeah.
That's the word I think we keep coming back to in one way or the other. But you see something that needs fixing in a person's life that's in some way significant to you. What circumstances come to your mind?
Hey Dale, when I was younger, there was a book written by Stephen Covey where he talked about these 7 habits, and the first habit was to seek to understand. And I think more often than not, we really don't know what needs to be fixed. We don't understand, and so I think you just have to pause and really try to understand it before you try to offer solutions, especially with your spouse.
Not that she's listening in. Yeah. No, absolutely. In some ways, I'm glad you came up with that right off the bang, which is seek first to understand. We'll end somewhere near there too, because that's fundamental to everything we're talking about tonight. I think people may be thinking about different kinds of things. I mean, rescuing. You see somebody that you feel somewhere, I need to rescue that person. There's something really dangerous that they're into. I think there's a range from rescuing to criticizing. And places in between. But the word I keep coming back to is fixing. When you see a problem in someone's life that needs fixing, when you see that, what does it feel like? What does it feel like when you see something in a person that matters to you that you suppose needs fixing and perhaps fixing by you? What are the feelings that occur to you at that point? If you're conscious of them, if you stop and took your pulse, what would it be?
I was just gonna say, when you first said this, it hits me the wrong way.
Right.
Just there's a certain arrogance to think that you know everything and you're looking at someone else's life and you're perfect and they're not. And that's how it all comes across to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would like it better phrased, when you see someone struggling, how can you help when you see someone struggling? That sounds better to me.
Yeah.
The fixing just,
Right.
I never thought of that.
because I've had lots of people try to fix me and I don't agree with what they want to fix.
Right.
I mean, Dale, just if I can jump in, there's some kind of trouble that people are heading straight into an oncoming car and you really need to pull them away. So some kind of things that need fixing are really life and death. And you feel like you have to do something. You cannot let someone keep going right into an oncoming car. But I appreciate Kendra's point because not everything is that, for sure. Most things are not.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever experienced that in someone close to me.
Yeah, what I thought of immediately was for the last few weeks, several of us have had to address my dad's reluctance to move into an assisted living center.
Mhm.
And so, there was a very specific issue in his life that needed to be addressed. And what I felt was anxiety, fear, because I can't think of a time in 55 years when I've had to go to my dad and say, I know this is what you want, but here's what you need to do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I thought of when you asked the question.
And I asked that question at the beginning because I think taking a check of your own space is kind of the first thing that really ought to be done. What am I feeling right now? And anxiety and fear, are exactly the words I would come up with. Pressure, it's what I thought of too. But to note from probably the very beginning, chances are you're operating from a position of fear. And that's something you might want to think about too, is that the position to operate from? It's going to be natural. We can be talking about scary things like Julie said. But do think through how you're feeling. Now, how is this situation often depicted in movies, TV shows, or books, and with what consequences? Can you think of any? Actually, I had problems with this question, almost left it out in this particular case. But my problem was almost every show.
Yeah.
Is this. How do you pick the one that really stood out to you? Does one particular show jump out at anyone right now?
One thing that I can think of often seeing is relationship issues. When someone, like when you're watching a movie and someone's being unfaithful and a best friend knows about that, and they're deciding, you know, whether or not to tell them or not, and how to deal with that situation, you know, because,
That's a good,
yeah.
that's a good example.
And many times though, the consequences of that are they're no longer friends.
Right.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. In
And have-
TV shows, they look for the most volatile thing that they can put in it to make you keep watching.
Yes, right. But
that's true,
they're
but
often not gonna go well.
but I know that with my daughter, she's been involved in 2 bad relationships
Hmm.
where we saw red flags from the beginning and we tried to bring it to her attention out of love for her and concern from her, and it
Right.
never went well.
They go, yeah, right.
And both times it ended up blowing up. And it was incredibly painful. So I don't know.
But it would have been incredibly painful if those relationship had continued on and.
No, they did continue on. That's what I'm saying, that we tried to bring it to her attention. It did continue on, and exactly what we feared happened. And in addition to that blowing up, our relationship wasn't as good either.
Right.
Yeah,
And that happens.
I don't know.
But sometimes you just feel like you're in a position that you have to say things because it'd be negligent not to. Like, I mean, I gotta say that as an elder, there's certain things I feel like I need to speak up about. And you can try to do it as gently and kindly and so forth, but sometimes you gotta bring something to someone's attention.
Yeah. I think I'm having trouble with the word fixing because it's a trap.
It's a
Because
trap.
it is a trap because if, you know, you can intervene if somebody's going in that car, coming in, you can intervene. It's not gonna change their, you know, reckless behavior perhaps or whatever. You can intervene when you need to in that sort of situation. But it's not one and done fixing it, you know, you can't just like intervene and it'll be fixed or whatever. And I totally agree with the idea that when I think about some of these examples in my own life, some of them, it's like I didn't understand what the situation was completely. And that goes back to Mike's point where you really have, once you knew more fully about what the situation was, you're able to say, okay, this is helpful in this situation. In some other situations, you know, that's not, but the more I had to know a lot more about it because my first inclination was not correct about it, you know. My first inclination was maybe like stay out, you know, because I learned that from other things, and I thought, no, you just have to let them fail a little, and then it's going to be, you know, because that's what they need, and that's what I learned from previous things. And then I realized in that particular scenario, no, that wasn't the best way because they actually had a completely different background and different things, and they just needed help. They needed straight out help. And so, you know, but in other people, it's like you're preventing them from failing, so you're doing too much. And then the one time I decided I was going to follow that advice, I did. It was all wrong. I had to come back and do.
You to understand got you to.
Yes.
Got you to that.
Yes,
place.
and realizing this is not the same scenario,
Yeah.
and that's the tricky thing, because sometimes you are going to get your.
Well, and sometimes you don't see the right answer until afterwards in hindsight.
Yeah, and you know that it's not going to get fixed, even if you help with something. Sometimes the person's inclinations are, you know, it's just not fixed. It's not that easy.
I would think it's presumptive to think that you can fix other people's problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Well, you
and that would
see-
be-
Oh, go ahead.
Because,
on the whole.
because I'm a sissy about intervening. in everything.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Well, let me explain how this comes to be. I mean, you think of the case study, you think of the problematic situation. When you see a problem in someone else's life that needs something, okay, and then because that's a ridiculous title, too long, you know, you start listening for the words that come out as you reflect on what the situation is. And I guess what I might say is I found the 2 words that are constantly problematic, and if you go at it from either of these words, you're probably not gonna do well. That's what, but you know, it's how to love. Well, fixing trouble, maybe you don't do that. Maybe, you know, if that's what you're doing, you need to be doing something else. You may still have to respond to the situation. But if you think you're fixing it, and if you see it purely as trouble, big trouble, you already are thrown off it. I think we've moved into the section which I think we'll spend most of the evening on now, which is thinking through shared experiences when this happened to you or happened to someone else. And what are the insights you might offer, and what lessons have you learned? And we've already, I think, figured out what's going to happen here too, which is, it's Kathy nailed it just a few minutes ago when we're going to come up with a bunch of conflicting ideas. That's what we're going to come up with, is a bunch of conflicting ideas. And that means we're doing the right thing. In other words, no idea is bad here. And it comes down, you know, why is that? You know, it's because each situation is case specific. And sometimes in what you would do in one case is exactly the opposite of what you would do in another case. So the notion of formulas kind of go out the window. It's just a matter of sharing experiences, sharing life insight, and seeing what we come up with. Mike start off with on my list that I came up with. Well, no, it's the second one, but seek first to understand. You know, listen, and be present. You know, that's the first thing you do when you see someone in trouble or someone having a problem. What else? Thoughts that occur to you in this?
Yeah, the one thing that occurs.
James is trying to get to me here.
A lot of times.
And he's shy, you gotta help.
A lot of times in my life, people try to talk to me about certain situations. And I didn't accept it, you know, I did it my own way, and sure enough, I paid the price. And a lot of times in other people's lives, I try to talk to them. But then again, after talking, I sat back and say, life will teach you. Life, that's all I'm saying. Life will show you, life will teach you whether it's good or bad. Because you're your own worst enemy, and I'm my own worst enemy. And that's that. You know, because I can't do nothing to change your mind if you're bent set on doing what you want to do. So let God teach you, or let life in general teach you.
Yeah.
Whether it's smacked in the face or whether it's whatever.
I like that. I mean, I think most of us have been there one way or the other, both sides of the situation you described. Others.
Julie, or was it Julie?
Oh, Julie.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, you know, I've found it helpful in my own life when people have brought things to my attention. Sometimes, usually not when they were trying to fix me, but in a lot of various situations, people will say something frank about what you're doing or not doing. And, you know, I may be defensive, but I always think about it. And most of the time they have something that makes some sense. So I really don't want to eliminate that from my life because, you know, because people are, you know, I'm going to say afraid to offend me. I don't want that.
Yeah.
I want people to be able to be frank, you know, to talk frankly. You know, it's always better when it's loving and kind and somebody really has your interests in mind. But, you know, there's too many times I've benefited from people being frank about things that are not perfect in me. you know, so I don't know how that fits in, but I do believe that there's something there.
Yeah, and you know, even if they're wrong on something they're saying, they're also right on something they're saying. And so if we look at it from the other side, how do you receive this kind of situation? I think that's very good advice. That I mean, the first thing is. First thing I think is, this is not the side we're looking at tonight, but I think the first thing is humility, which is to think through what you've just heard, because while they may be doing it, you know, like a bull in the china shop, they may be missing something significant in what they're saying. They're also saying something right. And to have the open heart that you know, a lot of things, I think what we'll find tonight is when you're operating from fear, you make mistakes. When you're operating from trust, you make less. And what you are doing there is operating from trust, that you trust there is
After a while.
yes. Yes, but I think we can operate from trust. If a person is trying to help us out of something they perceive to be a problem, I think we can trust that there's something good in what they're saying. Most cases, there's a good intention, and behind all that, there's God. And so whatever this situation may be, you should be able to find a way back to a foundation of trust here.
I've had a couple people in my life where I knew and they knew they were going down the wrong path. And certainly the impetus in my heart and spirit was to fix them. But what we wound up was, I told them, I said, I can't tell you to do it, I can't tell you not to do it. But we can talk about it if you do it. And that opened up a lot of grace. And sometimes they did, but I didn't get into a battle with them.
Yeah, it's not like, if you don't take my advice, I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
Whatever, that's what you don't want.
Yeah, and one or two said, you know, if you tell me not to do it, we won't be friends. I said, I'm not going to tell you, but if you do it, let's talk about it.
Right.
It really opened it up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mhm.
That's good.
Let's talk about this. Great sentence.
Well, I think I would try, and I have tried this, to put myself in the other person's position,
Mhm.
to treat someone the way I would want to be treated. And sometimes it's better not to try to get involved. You know, I don't know, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult situation to be in when somebody close to you is doing things that are harmful to them or to others.
Where do you get that idea?
Hmm?
Where did you get that idea from, to not do to others what you wouldn't want done to yourself?
Jesus.
I think this is a fundamental case where the golden rule applies in this particular situation. When you see someone struggling, and let's work with that mainly. I mean, Kendra's right. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. But too often in our minds, it slips over into fixing trouble. And at that point, fear is operating and we start making mistakes. So you see someone struggling. And I think one of the first things to think of is, okay, when I'm struggling, what do I appreciate? How do I want to be approached? And to recognize the approach I'm about to take right now would not be that. You know, and so maybe I ought to pull back and think through, you know, I've got my problems. And I will respond better when a person does something. I respond great with what Laconia just said.
I think the lesson that we learned through those two bad experiences is to not go in and say, I have the right answer, to go in and say, to walk alongside. It's fine to, I mean, I wouldn't not talk about it. I would have still talked about it, but I wouldn't have pressed for the answer that I thought was right, for her to do what I thought was right, even though it was right.
Right.
Even by hindsight, it was 100% right. But I would walk alongside and say, how can I help?
How can I help?
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dale?
Oh,
Here we go again.
I still have James on the clock here again.
Okay, keep on the clock.
As soon as he hears either one of you about to open your mouth, he cuts you off.
Anyway.
No, I'm just, so many times people try to talk to me out of what I'm doing. But I fear most, and I'd so much like to accept their, you know, their trust and everything, but you know what I'm scared of is God's discipline in my life. Because I don't like his discipline.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't let me down easy. You know, that's why I would so much like to accept that person advice, you know, and talking out of me, get me talk out of not to do what I'm gonna do.
Yeah,
Because God's discipline, like I said, I've seen it in my life. And I sure don't like it.
yeah,
I mean, it hurts.
yeah.
You know, and it's bad. Not bad, but good for
Long term.
long term.
Yeah.
But
That
hurts.
that is really helpful, James. I mean, you're looking at it from the standpoint of someone's coming to you wanting to help with something, and you're saying, hey, I'm already hurting. Don't miss that. In other words, the person whose problem I maybe want to help with, or who I feel is struggling. You know, the chances are, if it's a big enough issue for me to feel I need to engage, I need to say something about this, react in some way, the chances are they already know there's trouble here. And they're already hurting. And so it'd probably be really helpful if I could find a way to not hurt more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, now,
Art.
Art.
Yeah, I maybe just to, include in the conversation, and I'm personally looking for some help here. Because when we started talking about this, I was just thinking that what would be beneficial is to encourage a person's character and in some respects be a cheerleader as opposed to, shall we say, trying to fix. But then there's also an approach that could be maybe summarized by way of tough love, and whether or not that's an appropriate, shall we say, tack to take, and whether or not it's too judgmental to try to figure out which approach works for a particular type of person or trouble that they're in or personality that they have, and whether or not it's appropriate to try to make that decision or just to try to balance the two. I'm not really sure. And so I'm just kind of bringing it up to see what others think about that.
Seems like a good illustration of what we were talking about is we're going to come up with conflicting ideas. When you look at the issue broad in general, tough love's going to be an answer sometimes, and other times it's going to be recognize how deeply hurt this person is already. And and how are you going to figure that out? Well, we go back to what Mike said at the beginning, that my first job is to seek to understand, to really hear this person. But what I like in what how you started off, Art, was was if I possibly can, I will try to empower the person and not shame them. And so, you know, the chances are shame is already in the works. And so I'm going to further shame them. That's probably going to drive them just deeper into, you know, the problem that they have. But if I can find a way to empower them and to give them some sense of agency, you know, that's what I'm looking for. It may take another approach, but that's what I'll lead off with.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I like that, saying not shame them. I think that's important. I like that.
So that's hard, like, are you an idiot? or what? I can't, I get it sitting.
Right.
You could never do that.
I probably would not do that to the family.
The problem though is everybody's not like you, and so you have
Right.
to, you can't always say, well, what would I need in this? Because that's not my issue, that's not my thing, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
I have other ones, but that particular one may not be mine, so I can't really work from
The golden rule.
what would I want, because, you know, sometimes,
Yeah.
especially if it's a more of a, you know, lifestyle, or they're site quarters or whatever they are, that, you know, you can't fix that. You can help with it maybe, but I don't know, sometimes the golden rule doesn't quite work in those
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say Debbie's got a soft demeanor, but a steel interior.
Right, but I really like Laconia's idea of whatever you do, even with the tough love, which I always had. You know, I go back and forth about that, because sometimes in some of this thing, it's one thing if you're a friend and they're a grown up, it's another thing if they're your own child that you might need to do something for, or another younger person that you might have this sort of parental type of situation with, it's not a friend. So you have sort of different roles in there. But I do like the idea of whatever you do, make it so you can come back and talk about it or whatever. Sometimes I've drawn the line, and in hindsight, I wish I hadn't.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think even in things like, the more and more studies have been, I think tough love came out of the background of what do you do with someone who's dealing with an addiction? I mean, that's kind of where that concept came. And often it's like, okay, you know, you gotta kick him out of the house, you gotta do this, yeah. Basically, we withdraw, you know, from them. And studies are now showing that that's not the best approach. That what they need more than anything is community and, you know, connections. It's the connections that are gonna keep people setting better goals for themselves. Isolating them does not do a good thing. It's not a good thing.
yeah,
That's interesting.
isolations, yeah.
Keep talking. I'm writing notes.
Talking it over with people, I'm going back to my point of last week, though, talking it over with friends or, you know, people helps, helps a lot. You need is, I mean, you don't need to tell 100 people, but you know, you benefit from different perspectives. At least I do. I benefit from different perspectives.
I'm going to throw one idea in here, which does not apply to every situation here at all. But I never forget JG. I think we were Scott and Julia's Sunday lunch, more than a lunch, but we were, it was his 80th birthday, and we asked him that day, what would be like the one thing, the piece of advice you would probably first give at this point. And he had it immediately, like said, which is, you don't need to swing at every pitch. And I think that's a fundamental That's a fundamental point too. You don't need to swing at every pitch.
Yeah,
That I caught that immediately. I mean, from then on, I quit swinging. No, I mean, you do have to swing at some pitches.
yeah.
You don't have to
do.
swing at every pitch.
Right.
That's right.
And sometimes you too quickly suppose this is one I need to swing at. And then it goes back to what James said earlier is the things that only trouble teaches us. That I can hear that. I can hear the truth about something over and over and over again, but if I don't really like it, if it doesn't fit what I want or whatever, I'll probably find ways to go into denial, do this, that, or the other. There are things that you only learn from the trouble. And that's what kind of fits in with you don't need to swing at every pitch. And I think James said it very well early on, which is sometimes you just, you've said it, and you just have to, life will teach you that, and
And I think that's another example where different personalities, because there are some people, James that's what he said is his story is that he learns best from life experiences. But other people though they're hungry for mentoring. They're looking for people to be guides. And they would be, like happy for someone to say, I'm noticing this about you. Have you ever thought about doing it this way? And they're like, oh, tell me more, and there are, so you've got to, different people drive in different ways.
And then sometimes it has to, it's like, it's not like people have never told me that, but somebody hit me at just the right time, when just the right scenario, and it was like, yeah, I know I heard that before, but this time I really heard it in the right context or whatever. Or sometimes people didn't even intend to fix my problem, but just something they said was like, God-given or whatever, but it really hit home at that time. So you just never know. Sometimes that's why, sometimes you throw it out, but you're not, throw out a suggestion or something, but they don't have to pick it up. They don't have to pick it up that day. They don't have to pick it up next week.
It might be a lot like advertising, you have to do something 5 times before it registers.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to your quote there from JG. I guess it made me think of social media and how easy and prevalent it is to sort of take a swipe at whoever it is in the feed, because so much of our interaction, so much of many people's interaction is taking place online now. And so, you see something that you feel is wrong, and so you immediately address it, attack it, critique it. And like I'm thinking specifically today, a guy that I don't particularly like, he posted or reposted, there's a series of AI generated selfies. You may have commented on
wasn't
somebody's.
me.
No, but it's been going around, these artificial intelligence generated selfies that Moses took at the Red Sea, or Jesus took at the Last Supper, and things like that. So this guy reposted some of those, and just said, I hope this brings some joy to your day. And one of them happened to be the selfie of Jesus at the Last Supper, and he just got crucified. By a number of people commenting on the image, saying, it was irreverent and there's nothing funny about the Last Supper, and even though I don't particularly like this guy, I felt sorry for him. Because I just thought, people, come on,
Right.
This is not a ball to take a swipe at. Just let it go.
And there are other rules. I don't know if that's not the right word, but there are other principles that apply in social media that don't apply. They're not the same rules when you're in a face-to-face relationship with somebody.
Right.
but we, you know, we break those rules all the time on social media, and I think fairly ineffectively.
What was he saying, Chris?
Well, people were just critical of him for even posting this picture, which of course is a pretend picture.
What?
They were digitally created pictures of like Moses taking a selfie of himself at the Red Sea, or Jesus taking a selfie of himself at the Last Supper, or, you know, scenes like that in the
Yeah.
Bible.
Pulling humor out of very serious moments, I guess. is
Yeah.
Yeah, but some of them are serious moments, so they might not be, yeah, come on, they had sense of humor.
Yeah,
But yeah, but online, everything's flat,
everything's fun.
everything's flat, you know, and everything can turn a bad way, you know, it just seems like I just stay off of, I don't, because it's just gonna go wrong.
Excuse me, Dale.
Yeah, hard.
Would it be all right to try to just maybe move this into a slightly different direction?
Yes.
And really what I'm thinking about is I'm just thinking about the beginning ways, you know, the word danger and danger for themselves or others, or perhaps,
Right.
perhaps yourself. And I'm just extending that a little bit. I'm just kind of curious about it. So if someone's involved in let's say a criminal activity,
Right.
would incarceration make sense? Or if someone's doing, you know, I might say, white collar crime by way of fraud, is that something that we just lovingly try to fix? And, you know, I mean, at what point does, shall we say, the golden rule not work as well?
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. All of that's true. And it's good for you to go back and look at sort of the byline beneath the byline, which is perhaps when it represents real danger for themselves or others. Then I think that's where you have to step in. I want to move to that last section on stories and teachings from the life of Jesus, which we've covered a little bit, but stories that show you loving ways to move forward when you see trouble in someone's life. But before that, and I think I'm in scripture here in general, is to me the words patience and trust are really important to whatever process we're talking about here. A person came up to me at church recently with very legitimate, very natural frustrations with another person, and you know, my heart just went out to them because the person I'm talking to is really hurt and needs more, and you know, it's church hallway, and all I'm basically doing is listening. But what I'm also thinking is somewhere in the process of bringing people back from danger, to use Art's term here, that, you know, let's work with that. We're talking about danger here when you're pulling somebody back from eventually this person's response to the pain they're in could turn dangerous themselves. They could do something that would be dangerous about this. And what I wanted to get to, but knew it wasn't the time, knew it was too early in the process, knew I really had to listen. I do empathize. I empathize entirely with what this person is saying. But I also thought patience. I mean, if this problem needs to be fixed in the next 48 hours, I give up. Can't be. I don't think this problem can be fixed in the next 3 months. I think this might take 2 or 3 years. and somewhere along the way, I'm thinking, but we're followers of Jesus, and patience ought to be in our repertoire. It ought to be something we are capable of under the right circumstances, not immediate danger necessarily, but patience and trust that we respond to people with our own patience and with our own trust that the right thing will be done over time. Now, turning to the stories of Jesus, the first thing I'd call your attention to very quickly is Jesus as portrayed in the series The Chosen nails this quality. It's one of the reasons I love that show. I mean, Jesus, as he's portrayed in that series, speaks the truth always. But there's often a twinkle in his eye. It's very apparent to whoever he's talking to that he loves them, but he's telling the truth. And if it's very apparent that you love and respect and you actually grant the other person sovereignty, that's what Laconia is doing with his thought there. I'm not going to tell you you can't. I'm not going to tell you you can. But we can talk about this. When they see that, they open up, and so when I look at it's one example after another in that show, but the guy playing that role nails that. The script writers get this point and get it very, very well. I have a bunch. I'm looking at the clock and saying, jump in here with your own scriptures, but the Sermon on the Mount, in addition to the golden rule, the one that struck me is the not judging. Well, okay, we'll talk about that some night, but it's the where Jesus goes after that and says, why are you worried about the speck in that person's eye and you're not seeing the plank in your own? And that's a fundamental principle here that I'm often more concerned about specks in other people's lives than I am perhaps a huge plank in my own. We do have Galatians 6:2. In this Wednesday evening program, we finished up the book of Galatians not that long ago. And in the last chapter, it's carry each other's burdens, which goes to, well, we may have to swing at some pitches here. There's somebody carrying a burden now, but again, if you see it as if I'm carrying their burden, what's the first thing I'm going to ask? How can I help? Philippians 2:4, look not to your own interest, but to the interest of the other. There are cases when I'm trying to fix something in somebody else's life because it's my interest in that being fixed. Well, that's probably not going to go too far. I need to be looking to their interests, not to my own interests. And I look at Jesus when he's talking to the rich young ruler, or to the Samaritan woman, or to the penitent thief on the cross. He leaves all of those cases in process. The Samaritan woman hasn't been told the plan of salvation. He's talked about, life situations and talked about honesty and living a life of integrity and various other things. And talked about inclusiveness, that both on this mountain and in Jerusalem one day we'll all see God in ways that are grace and truth and so on. And he leaves the village. Case on the cross. The pamphlets when I was a kid on the penitent thief, and I was under the old law. Well, no, it's actually because Jesus leaves things in process. I mean, he solves as much as he can solve under these circumstances. And he knows there more will go on. Today you will be with me in paradise. Well, work it out then. That kind of thing. Others. Anyone want the last word here? We've had some great ones.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that William Cotton, the act of adultery is kind of an interesting story, and hopefully, I can say this in 35 seconds because it's 8 o'clock, but the way he treats her, right? No do I condemn you, no one's condemned you, but go and live your life of sin. He does try to provide her some direction. It's not just
Yes.
And it's interesting even the way he treats those who drop stones. He says he's without sin, cast first stone. Then he kind of looks down, right? He gives them a chance to each make that choice. It's not looking like, do you have a stone? Are you going to drop it? Are you? So he's allowing everybody in the situation to make the right choice, maintaining their dignity.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Dan. That was great.
Good night.